A man in a janitor's uniform walked through marble corridors while executives laughed at him. By lunch, every single one of them was cleaning out their desks. This is the story of how a billionaire disguised himself as a janitor and fired an entire management team before noon. Richard Ashford stood in the lobby of Ashford Industries wearing a grey maintenance uniform with a mop in his hands. The 62-year-old billionaire had built this company from nothing, turning a small manufacturing business into a corporate empire worth $3 billion. But something was terribly wrong. Profits were dropping, employee morale was at an all-time low, and complaints were flooding his desk from workers who felt invisible. Richard made a decision that would change everything. He would go undercover as a janitor to see what was really happening inside his own company. On Monday morning, March 9th, 1992, Richard walked through the employee entrance at 6 a.m. His silver hair was hidden under a worn baseball cap, and his expensive watch was replaced with a cheap plastic one. Nobody recognized him. The real test was about to begin. The first person Richard encountered was Stephen Palmer, the Vice President of Operations. Stephen was standing near the coffee machine, talking loudly on his cell phone. Richard pushed his cleaning cart past him, and Stephen didn't even glance in his direction. He just kept talking about his golf game while completely ignoring the janitor next to him. Richard took note but said nothing. He kept moving through the halls, observing everything. In the accounting department, Richard found Jennifer Mills, the chief financial officer, berating a young employee named Marcus. Jennifer was screaming about a minor error in a report, calling Marcus incompetent and worthless in front of the entire office. Marcus stood there with his head down, humiliated. Richard stopped sweeping and watched. Jennifer noticed him and snapped. "What are you looking at? Get back to work, janitor. Nobody wants to see you standing around." Richard nodded and continued cleaning, but his blood was boiling. This was his company, and this was how his executives treated people. Throughout the morning, Richard witnessed behavior that disgusted him. Department heads were taking 2-hour lunches while their teams worked through breaks. Managers were falsifying reports to make their numbers look better. Executives were openly mocking employees, creating a toxic environment where fear ruled instead of respect. But the worst was yet to come. At 10:30 a.m., Richard was cleaning the executive conference room when he overheard a meeting. Stephen Palmer, Jennifer Mills, and 4 other top executives were discussing a plan to embezzle money from the company. They were manipulating vendor contracts, creating fake invoices, and pocketing the difference. They laughed about how easy it was to fool the old man, referring to Richard himself. They had no idea the old man was standing 15 feet away, emptying their trash cans. Richard's hands trembled as he gripped the handle of his mop. These people weren't just arrogant. They were criminals. They were stealing from him, from the company, from the hard-working employees who depended on their jobs. He had seen enough. It was time to end this. At 11:45 a.m., Richard walked out of the building and got into his car. He drove home, took off the janitor uniform, and put on his custom-tailored suit. By noon, he was walking back through the front entrance of Ashford Industries, this time as himself. The receptionist's eyes went wide. "Mr. Ashford, we weren't expecting you today," Richard smiled. "I know. Call an emergency meeting. I want every executive in the main conference room in 15 minutes. No exceptions." Word spread through the building like wildfire. Richard Ashford was here, and he wanted everyone in management upstairs immediately. Executives scrambled, wondering what was happening. Stephen Palmer straightened his tie nervously. Jennifer Mills checked her makeup, assuming this was some routine announcement. They had no idea what was coming. At 12:15 p.m., Richard walked into the conference room where 23 executives sat waiting. The room fell silent. Richard stood at the head of the table and placed a folder in front of him. He looked at each person slowly, letting the tension build. "Good afternoon," Richard began, his voice calm but cold. I've spent the last 6 hours working in this building, not in my office, not in meetings. I worked as a janitor. The room erupted in confused whispers. Stephen Palmer's face went pale. Jennifer Mills stopped breathing. Richard continued, I wanted to see what really happens here when you think nobody's watching, and what I found was absolutely disgusting. He opened the folder and pulled out documents. Stephen Palmer, you've been billing the company for business trips you never took. $14,000 in fraudulent expenses over the last 6 months. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Stephen tried to speak, but Richard cut him off. Get out, now. 2 security guards appeared and walked Stephen out of the room. The other executives sat frozen in their chairs. Richard turned to Jennifer Mills. You've been creating fake vendor invoices and splitting the money with your brother's shell company. $340,000 stolen from this company. You're fired, and I'm pressing criminal charges. Expect the police to contact you by the end of the day. Jennifer's face turned white. She stood up, stumbling, and was escorted out by security. One by one, Richard went through the room. He fired the Director of Human Resources for ignoring harassment complaints. He fired the head of sales for manipulating commission structures to cheat employees. He fired the VP of Marketing for using company funds for personal purchases. 12 executives were terminated in 30 minutes. What about the rest of you? Do you have any idea what kind of culture you've created here? I watched managers humiliate employees this morning. I saw people being treated like they were worthless just because they didn't have a fancy title. That ends today. Richard looked at the remaining executives. You have 2 choices. You can either commit right now to changing how this company operates, treating every single employee with respect, or you can join the others and leave. I'm giving you 10 seconds to decide. Nobody moved. They all nodded in agreement. Good, Richard said, because starting today, things are going to be very different around here. Over the next 3 months, Richard rebuilt Ashford Industries from the inside out. He promoted Marcus, the young accountant who had been humiliated by Jennifer Mills, to a management position. He implemented an open-door policy where any employee could speak directly to leadership without fear. He brought in ethics training and established a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect and misconduct. The company culture transformed completely. By the end of 1992, Ashford Industries saw a 42% increase in employee satisfaction and a 28% increase in productivity. Profits soared to record levels. Richard had saved his company by becoming invisible, by seeing the truth that only those at the bottom could see. If you've ever felt invisible at work, if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter because of your position, drop a comment below and tell me your story. And if you want more incredible true stories about people who stood up against corruption and injustice, hit that subscribe button right now because we're just getting started. This is the kind of content you don't want to miss. The lesson Richard Ashford learned that day in March of 1992 was simple but powerful. Title and position mean nothing if you don't have character. Respect isn't something you demand because of where you sit in a company. It's something you earn by how you treat people, especially those who can't do anything for you. Richard never forgot that lesson, and he made sure nobody else in his company ever forgot it either.